Examining our soil, part one. First is just recognizing that there are three categories: physical, chemical, and biological characteristics of soil. So with that in mind, we'll start with the physical. The physical aspect of a soil is manifested in its term soil texture. The textural classification of your soil is perhaps the only test that you can do yourself and actually judge fairly accurately, at least without significant training in geology or soil science or something of that sort, where you can begin to judge the presence of minerals and types of rock contributing to your local soil body. There you can start getting into fertility, but at least texture is pretty accessible. So we have two options. One involves basically taking a sample, putting it into a jar, and shaking it up. The other has you work the soil with your hands like putty. So with practice, manually determining your soil texture is quick and easy and functionally quite accurate. If this is your first time, I do suggest you try out both methods to see both to see how you like them, and then also it kind of gives you just a better average of what your soil texture might be. So I've got supporting notes in the documents below. Supporting documents in the notes below, but basically the manual determination has you grab a bit of soil, work it in your hands, and follow a series of mini experiments in a flow chart to arrive at your textural class. The jar method is utilizing Stokes' law of frictional force for particles suspended in a fluid. Basically, dense particles fall out of suspension faster. We can take advantage of this by mixing our sample of soil with water, shaking it vigorously, and then watering the layers of sediment form as the water sorts out our particles by soil, by size and by density. So that's physical characteristics. Chemical characteristics. A test for the chemical content in your soil is simple and straightforward, and it's easy. You send it to a lab. I've linked for a couple articles to teach you how to take a soil sample and to prepare it for shipping to a lab. Really, you ship it in, you wait for your results. That's what you should do. You really just aren't equipped to do any of these tests at home, If you really do want to do some at home, the best you've got is kind of a simple pH test. I can't really think of a practical scenario where you would want to know the pH but won't want to know some other chemical test, so you may as well send it to the lab, because I guarantee you they are going to pH test it basically first thing, because it's what determines how and what kind of other tests to use to give you accurate results. So chemically, just send it off to the lab. Biologically, this is a tough one. We're talking generally about microbial life here. Basically, to assess this, you do need a lab. Again, if you keep your sample cool and ship it quickly, or process it and properly dry it out, you can get a reasonable estimate of the level of biological activity within your soil, but it's not really necessary for practical purposes. Simply knowing your organic matter percentage is enough. If you want to get a little bit more detailed, you can look at your C to N ratio or your active carbon, depending on how nerdy you're trying to get, and especially if you're tracking things over time or in response to more scientific interventions. But really, you don't need to know this kind of info. Microbial life is pretty easy. If you start increasing organic matter and start planting in it, the rest of it's going to follow. The single accessible test that I can think of for you is to maybe dig down about a cubic foot of soil, sift it, and count how many earthworms you find. It's fairly subjective. The more earthworms you find, the better. Depending on who you ask, gives you a different number of how many you want to find, but basically it's especially good when comparing, like maybe if you have a garden site versus a non-garden site, or if you have two sites and you're not really sure which. Kind of dig through, see how many worms you find, and the place with more worms is a more healthy soil. So that's it for just what kind of soil tests there are and what it kind of tells you about them.